We're about to tackle one of the most difficult subjects there is, humanity's capacity for mass violence. Now I know, this is a dark journey, but truly understanding the forces that drive these events, well, that's the first, absolutely essential step toward making sure they never happen again.
This line, it's just chillin'. It's from Homer's Iliad, written almost 3,000 years ago. And it's such a stark reminder that this impulse, this idea of completely annihilating an entire people, it's not some modern invention. It's a darkness that's been part of the human story for a very, very long time.
So that's the real question, isn't it? Why? From ancient conquests all the way to modern, state-sponsored atrocities, there are these identifiable patterns, these mechanisms that are always at play. And that's what we're going to do here. We're going to investigate those patterns, using history as our guide to get to the roots of these unthinkable acts. Okay, but before we can even begin to analyze the problem, we have to be precise. The words we use really matter. Terms like massacre, genocide, and democide, they all describe different sides of mass killing, and getting these distinctions right is the first step toward any kind of real clarity.
You know, a massacre is probably what first comes to mind for a lot of us. It's a specific, brutal, and just horrifying event. Think about the storming of a city or the slaughter of everyone in a village. It's this concentrated burst of violence, which is different from a long, drawn-out campaign of destruction.
Now, with genocide, the key word, the thing that changes everything, is intent. This term was officially defined by the United Nations after World War II, and it isn't just about how many people were killed. It's about the specific, deliberate intention to destroy a particular group, whether that's national, ethnic, racial, or religious, to destroy them as a group. That specific intent is the absolute core of the definition, both legally and morally.
And that brings us to a broader, really powerful term, democide. It was coined by the researcher R.J. Rummel, and you can think of it as an umbrella concept for pretty much any murder committed by a government. So this includes genocide, but it also covers things like killing political opponents, mass purges, and state-sponsored terror. It forces us to focus on the perpetrator, the state itself, which lets us analyze all these different forms of government violence under one single crucial framework.
All right, so let's put these ideas to work. We're going to start way back in the 13th century with the Mongol conquests. This is a perfect example of pre-modern state-directed mass killing. And believe me, this wasn't just chaotic warfare. It was something way more systematic.
Here's the crucial point. For the Mongol Empire, massacres were a tool. They were an instrument of statecraft. The total annihilation of cities that decided to resist them, that was a deliberate strategy. It was a message, written in blood, and sent to every other city in their path. Surrender now, or you will be completely destroyed. It was psychological warfare on a truly epic scale. And the results of that strategy were just staggering. Historians estimate that the total death toll from the Mongol campaigns was somewhere between 20 and 60 million people. Now, to put that into perspective, that might have been as much as 10% of the entire world's population at the time. It was a demographic catastrophe that literally, physically reshaped continents.
So what does this first example show us? Well, the motivation was strategic, right? It was a tool for conquest and control. The method was simple: the complete destruction of any city that fought back. And the targets, well, they weren't a specific race or religion, they were simply anyone who dared to resist. The consequence? A world that was changed forever, not just politically, but in its population and even its environment.
Okay, now let's leap forward 7 centuries to an event that would become the awful prototype for modern genocide, the Holocaust. And here, we see this chilling evolution in both the why and the how of mass killing.
And this is where the shift becomes truly terrifying. The Holocaust wasn't a tool of military conquest. It was a project of ideological purification. It took the modern state, with its ministries, its railways, its cold, faceless bureaucracy, and it weaponized it all to carry out an industrial-scale extermination, driven purely by a hateful racial ideology.
6 million. 6 million European Jews systematically murdered by the Nazi regime and its collaborators. And behind that number, that's 6 million individual lives, 6 million families, entire communities, just extinguished by this campaign of industrialized hate.
So here, the motivation was purely ideological, the method was industrial, and the target was fundamentally different. It wasn't people who resisted, it was people whose very existence was considered a threat.
The sheer scale and the systematic, factory-like nature of this horror, it forced the world to react, to create new international laws like the UN Genocide Convention, in a desperate attempt to ensure that this could never again happen.
So you take these two vastly different historical events, and so many others, and you start to see these disturbing patterns emerge. These atrocities, even though they're separated by centuries, they are not random. They follow a grim and, frankly, a predictable logic.
The researcher R.J. Rummel, the man who came up with the concept of democide, he summed up all his findings with this incredibly powerful principle. The common denominator, the one thing you find in virtually all state-sponsored mass killings, is the concentration of unchecked power. When a regime has no constraints, no one to tell it no, the risk of democide just skyrockets.
In this absolute power, it almost never just appears overnight. It follows this terrifyingly predictable path. First, you have dehumanization. That's when you start casting a target group as less than human, calling them vermin or insects or a disease. Then, state propaganda weaponizes that hatred, turning neighbor against neighbor. As that fear and division grows, an authoritarian regime consolidates its power, silencing any and all opposition. And then, once that power is absolute, the state mobilizes its bureaucracy for the final horrible step: mass killing. This is the blueprint.
So, why study this? I mean, why force ourselves to look into this abyss? It's not about dwelling on horror just for the sake of it. It's about learning a vital lesson for our own survival. Because if we learn to recognize the warning signs, the dehumanizing language, the state-run propaganda, the consolidation of absolute power, then we have a chance to intervene. This knowledge isn't just academic, it is our most powerful tool for prevention. You can think of this not just as history, but as a diagnostic manual for the survival of our own humanity.
And so we're left with this final, unavoidable question. History has shown us the path to atrocity time and time again. So knowing what we now know, what is our collective responsibility to recognize that path when we see it starting, to stand in its way, and to prevent another one of these chapters from ever being written?